And this is a whole different kit, a whole different player than, so the EQs that I had going on for the other record probably won't work. Actually, it sounds pretty good, but a couple things I want to talk about as far as EQ is concerned is concept I call offending frequencies, and that's just basically, like I said, I've got some general shapes happening as far as drums, and it's easiest heard on the snare. Here's the snare with no EQ. Quite boxy. There's without the low cut. Got a lot of kick bleed, got a lot of thuddy low end. So I'm gonna get rid of that. The high end. That takes away some of the crispiness or whatever, but like I said, this is, I wanted a rock kind of vibe, but so I just.
So you're leaving in like the wave starts to come up at 100?
Yeah.
And then peaks at.
Yeah, the mid-range cut, yeah, let's see. Yeah, usually with my the mid-range cut, like I said, if you look at all my drums, this is pretty typical. There's almost always a cut around 500 or 750, somewhere in the mids, just because the drums acoustically sound boxy. Same deal with the toms over here. They're slightly different. But like I said, there's almost no rules in terms of it depends on if you use a drum with birch shells. Birch has less natural mid-range, so you don't have to cut as much. Okay. For a snare, a metal snare drum, the brass snare drums have a little more mid-range than steel. A maple snare drum will have a different, and it depends on the drum head. Some drum, Evans has a more thuddy. Sometimes I find myself having to cut more mids with Evans and things like that. But like I said, this is stuff that you really just kind of need to, with me, it's like I just trust my gut. That's one thing about mixing that I read that really stuck with me is just like, you just got to you just got to trust your gut. If you feel like something's not right or you feel like something is right, then just roll with that, If you feel like it's like, man, something's just not right about the snare, then work with it some more, and it's there's a lot of people are like, hey, how do you mix? And it's one of those things, again, it's just like the keyboard thing. At first, it's going to take a lot of work. You're going to have to really look at the details. But over time, it gets to a point where it's like, if you're successful in having, dialing up a decent mix, good levels, good tones, and things like that, and then you do it again. And over time, you get quicker and quicker at it. And now it's almost to a point where I don't even think about it. I just kind of go with my gut on everything. And I just, if it feels good, I'll leave it alone. If I feel like, this sounds a little boxy. I'm to the point now, like I've messed with EQs enough to where I kind of can hear, I can be like, I can feel like, hey, it's a little tubby, boxy or whatever. Let me cut it around 250, 300, see if that fixes it, and I can kind of think in terms of like what the sounds are. So I think it's really important to sit down, like if you want to mix records. It's got a lot. EQ is a huge deal. And tones and how things sit in the mix, and I think it's just as important. Dynamics are super important, but EQ is like the thing that you need to master. So get one of these surgical EQs or whatever, and really find out what yields what, what does what. And like I said, again, in the digital realm, you want to me, it sounds cleaner and better if you create your EQ curves with cuts rather than boosts. And a lot of professionals will say that.
So reductive EQ versus.
Yeah, I'll boost here and there every once in a while, just in small amounts. But like I say, if you boost a lot, you actually add a lot of noise,
right?
Digital noise to the sound or whatever, digital gain, and analog gain good because it has harmonic distortions, but digital gain bad in my mind, because it's just not a pleasant gain. But like I said, there's a concept of offending frequencies. Like I said, I usually try to make broad strokes at first. If you notice on my kick and my snare, I have 2 EQs engaged. I'm making some broad strokes on the EQ. Kind of like on this snare drum, I kind of like having that extra sizzle. different snares. But yeah, oftentimes, and I may have cut that because maybe the hi-hat or cymbal bleed was too much in the mix on the snare mic or something when we mixed with the Will's snare or something. I don't know. But for now, I kind of like this. So that sounds too metal. Sounds too boxy. Yeah, basically where I had it feels the best to me. And that might be because I'm used to it now because we just listened to it for a minute. So you always want to come back the next day and see. Because I've learned that the hard way. A lot of times it's good to step away, even for days if you can, if you're mixing, and to come back and listen again because a lot of times you'll hear stuff like, oh, I can't believe I didn't hear that, you know. But like I said, these are some broad strokes, you know. That's too thin. It's a little tubby. About where I had it was probably the low end sweet spot. It's usually like a cut off around a 150 to 200 somewhere in there because you want a little bit of low end punch that you can kind of feel in the snare, but you don't want it to sound so, you know, unless you're doing like a Def Leppard like 80s style, just really thick, you know, and you got to have it be doing that style of music where it suits it or whatever. But like I said, I cut the mud on the snare.
We got a question from Mountain Stream. Mini mixers seem to cut at about 500 hertz on all tracks and high passing all tracks except for heavy bass tracks at about 100 hertz. Do you also have such things you always do?
Yeah, like I mentioned about the cymbals, I almost always cut at 500. Yeah, for most rock and metal. Sometimes, you know, for more, you know, if you're doing like a different style, sometimes I might cut as low as 350, just to leave a little more gonginess in the cymbals. But I rarely cut any lower than that. But like I said, on the snare here again, I almost always cut these lows. It's this tubby low. I feel like it's just, and it's, you know, the reason that's there, like I said, I want it to sound more like the acoustic drum really sounds to my ear. My ear is like way up here. That mic is right on that snare. So I've got to do some EQ correction to get it to sound like, you know, the way we want it to sound. You know, this is the way we're accustomed to hearing sound. So the mic, you know, the mic is its position, its ear. The mic itself hears differently than our ear. The frequency response and the position affects the way. You know, if you put your ear right on a snare drum like that, it would probably sound pretty bassy. You know, and pretty boxy. So we're doing some, you know, some corrective EQ. Like I said, the kick drum. Like I said, I'm cutting the lows. These, like I said, there's no absolute like frequency rules, you know, like, you know, aside from like the 500 that I can think of. Okay. But these are some ballparks. Oftentimes, like I said, for metal, you know, I'll cut the highs at maybe like, you know, 12 or 14. This particular rock record, I'll probably cut the highs, you know, lower because I don't want a clicky sound, you know, or No Tommy doesn't want. But then, you know, broad strokes first. Let me check out I won't spend too much time. In general, that's pretty good. Let me check the kick inside. Oh, the kick outside, if you notice, I'm cutting all the highs. Yeah. All I've got is the lows. It's clipping right now. That's all I want out of that, personally. Some people
just low-end information.
Yeah, just a little extra boom, and
yeah.
Some people leave a full frequency and blend it too. You know, that could be useful too, but that's normally what I do. So that sounds like prayer for cleansing. Sounds like a pretty cool amount of high end for a rock kick, you know. And like I said, these are educated guesses because we don't know until we get the guitar in there. But I don't want to leave. And maybe it's because we just had it set and I'm just used to that. But like I said, basically I'm just trimming off the possibly rumbly low end that we can't even hear. You know, most people can't hear, you know, 30 hertz or whatever. But like I said, I'm just in case there's some like rumbly noise or something, just go ahead and get rid of it. Creates that space. Mid-range. kind of one thing about rock and metal. It seems like to me, it's like, particularly with drums and in guitar even, it's like rock has mids, metal doesn't. You know, because that sounds metal to me. Like, especially if I had like same kick drum, everything, but it sounds like, you know, black metal kick drum or something. You know,
Do you normally,
that sounds like old school '70s or something. You know, like. Yeah, kind of like that. It's not metal, you know.
yeah,
And a lot of this mids, sometimes you need more mids than you think you need to cut in the mix. You know, you cut the mids all the way out. Like a lot of times people dial up a bass tone with like no mids. And it sounds cool by itself, but then when you put it in the mix, you're like, I can't hear the bass at all. And you need those mids to cut, because the bass is still a low mid, you know, in the context of things. It's still living in this area, you know, right here primarily. What were you gonna say?
when you do mix, do you prefer speakers or headphones?
I prefer headphones, honestly.
For everything or just drums or?
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
but, you know, as far as like when I mix, what I can hear you know, I use the industry standards, you know, the 7506s, you know, you see these everywhere. They're $100 headphones, and it's just like, you know, even mastering guys, they use them as a source of reference and things like that, but they're nice and full frequency. They don't hype up the lows too much, and they don't hype up the highs, and
Yeah.
you know, I feel like when I mix with these, like, you know, if it sounds right and then I take it to my car, it's pretty close. With the exception, like I said, the wild card's the low sub frequencies or whatever. And I have, you know, obviously a subwoofer for that, for my system, whatever. So to reference that kind of stuff. But when I mix it with my flat studio monitors, you know, it'll sound great in the studio. I take it in the car, and then the studio monitors have better transit response, things of that nature. So the kick drums, like what I found, I need the kick drums and the vocals need to be louder on the studio monitors, and the guitars need to sound almost quiet in the studio monitors to be right out in the car or to be right on the boombox. Like I always check my final mixes on a boombox or my surround sound system in my house, or you know, in the car. Normal, like I try to think like, hey, where do normal people listen to these? Even check the iPod earbuds that come factory. But like I said, I feel like these Sonys, they really help me get in the ballpark quicker than any other reference. I don't know why.
Cool. Yeah.
You can hear the stereo separation. You can hear negative artifacts, glitches, things of that nature. Cool. So like I said, I'll go through and do some broad strokes. I've done through broad strokes with the toms here. Let's give you a tom. That's a tom naturally with that mic. That's with all the highs. But like I said, I start with some broad strokes, usually a mid cut on drums, a high, get rid of the extra highs that we don't need, get rid of the extra lows. It's across the board. And then, like I said, then I go through and I find I find the offending frequencies or frequencies that may be harsh. Like I said, we've used some quality preamps and things of that nature, so we don't really need. But one thing I'm noticing right off the bat, you hear that. That could be cool if you like that. Let me add just so I have more to work with. You can make a really sharp cue, and then you can kind of, scroll around to find that note. I think it's 300, isn't it? That's part of it anyway. Let's see if there's any more offending frequencies, like we can just do some more scanning around. Sounds kind of annoying to me. Can't really hear it. I kind of hear it now, yeah. Yeah, once you hear it, you're like, okay, and you start listening for it, you're like, okay, I can hear it. There's like, these might not be a problem in the mix, but. One thing I've noticed around 2.3K always sounds harsh. I remember reading about somewhere around the 2K region. A lot of times it's always nice to pull out a little bit of that on almost everything, especially distorted guitar. And around 4 or 6K on the distorted guitar, it's like this is something. In the headphones, man, that kills your ears. I still got it, like I said. I mean, I would take some more time and go through and find, all the offending frequencies and such, but. You don't hear that, which, like I said, some people like it, but most people don't dig the Saint Anger type thing, and they could have easily done that. And I'm not sure what the thinking was there. That make too much of a difference, does it? Let me grab another EQ, see if I can find some. These are obviously offending frequencies I have. Kind of cleans it up a little bit, maybe. That's super subtle. But like I said, I would go through and find frequencies that might be offending in the mix, just like I said, it's a matter of just sweeping through everything and seeing what, if there's any improvement. And I would repeat the process again once I get it in the mix. Much difference there, but
So as you're sweeping that, you're looking for anything that's like a higher volume. Is that right? Sort of anything that really sticks
something
out.
that stands out. Like I said, with the headphones on, you can really tell. Like,
Okay.
I recommend doing this process with the headphones, honestly, because it kind of like, okay, that kind of hurts my ears.
Yeah.
Just get rid of some of that, And you don't have to do as drastic as the cut I'm doing here,
Yeah.
but you're like, man, if that just really hurts you. I mean, like I said, on the snare drum, it's really noticeable. On guitar, I'll do that on guitar here, and it's noticeable also. Some guitar amps and heads and things like that have different amounts and different frequencies of. See, here's with no EQ. Sounds good, but a little fizzy. So I usually, for rock sound, I kind of. Just want to get that out of there. This will make some space for the vocal pronunciation, stuff of that nature. So I don't hear any beneficial low end past, say, 80 hertz on this particular tone. And plus we want a rock sound. It's not like metal. We're doing any chug-a-chug or anything like that. See if we can find some offending frequencies. Usually some is like around 2.3. Hear it? In the headphones, that will kill your ears. You hear it in there? And it
I would
sounds-
never notice it unless you did it though.
Yeah, unless you found it and you're like, see, it's annoying now that we notice this.
Yeah, now I know.
It's like,
It's crazy.
That's
And
pretty
It's
amazing.
like my brain playing a trick on me.
Yeah.
You can hear the stuff in Wheel of Detail because that was like a whoo that's happening all the whole time. And that could be the resonance, like just a weird resonance of a cab or a head or guitar or something, and it's crazy because it doesn't matter what's being played on guitar. Usually those same frequencies are a problem or they're offending. So, if you just, dial them back a little bit. But obviously, like I said, this stuff matters mostly in the mix, what it sounds like. But I would do the same thing with the bass. A lot of times with the bass, it's around 200. It's got muddy. Hear that woofy. This just kind of tightens it up, cutting around in that area. I've noticed it really, you got a solid low end and in the mid range they're separate. Hear the difference? Vocals, you can do that also. I won't spend a lot of time, but actually, I won't worry about vocals. But like I said, a lot of times with the Neumann, this particular combination in your voice, I haven't had to do any offended frequency carving. So, but sometimes on screaming, certain mics, sometimes I get somebody sends me they should track like an MXR mic or something like that, something cheap. And it's just got really biting hard top end. I just find that biting frequency and just carve it out, and it's like, okay, now it sounds good, But that's something, like I said, I would go across the board or whatever and find affinity frequencies, do some broad stroke EQ. On guitar, like I said, if you notice, like I've cut the highs and lows that I don't need. On the bass, I've cut the highs and lows that I don't need. Well, that's actually guitar. But on the lead guitar, when we was talking about mixing lead guitars, like I said, normally especially particularly if you're using the same amp or something like that, oftentimes I want to give the lead guitar a contrasting voice. So either we do that with using a different amp, use a different distortion pedal setting, different guitar, maybe different pickup. And if that's not the case, you can use just different EQ. You can cut some additional highs that you don't need and additional lows and thin out the acoustic guitar, the lead guitar, just so that it sits in the mix a little better, so that there's clarity involved.
Turn the vocals up.
Yeah, turn the vocals up always. No, but this is one thing. I had it up for the tracking, so we can.
Whispering in, sink this house and get out now. The waves crush all within. No one lives this world alive. Whispering in.
But yeah, kind of my approach to the mixing, like I said, you get the EQs kind of in the ballpark, you get the levels kind of in the ballpark. You basically get all the colors on the page, and then you kind of start filing out the details. You just listen to it, Like this intro, let's just take it segment by segment. This song's really good and easy because it comes in pieces. Let's check out the drums. Like, hey, what do we like? What do we don't like? All right, to me, these cymbals are cranking, so let me see if I can deal with that.
Don't bare your neck to the wall. Put your head on the ground. Oh,
Yeah, see, I don't feel like we need a lot of hat at all because we got plenty of hat on the overheads. Coming through the snare mic. This is a plugin I use often, the Transx, to get a little more popping out of the drums. Makes it sound like you're just hitting it softer. And you're hitting it harder. A lot of people use compressors for the very same thing. You know, just mess with the, you know, obviously the popular 1176 compressor and stuff like that. You can set the attack slow, so you change the ratio of the body of the information to the attack. But with the Transx, with the transient modulator plugins like this and Sonic's transient modulator, you can really more precisely control the attack and, you know, the punch and the not punch of the sound. In this case, I think it sounds good on the snare, actually. So if you remember, I'm running a compressor just for kind of character and flavor, not so much dynamic control, and not so much, you know, I just like this analog, kind of emulates like a tube type sound. And normally I actually run a tape emulator, and the one I use isn't here. And then here's the Oxford transient modulator on the drum bus. But normally I like the way tape sounds for drums as the most, you know. But it just kind of rounds off the transients, kind of glues it all together. Same thing with the, you know, the SSL. This is famous for gluing the mix together.